Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Becky Achen, and I am really excited to be talking to you a little bit about our sport management program at University of the Pacific, which is housed in the Eberhart School of Business. If you are listening to this recording, that means I was unable to make it today to present with you live, and while I do apologize for that, I still wanted to be able to tell you a little bit about sport, business, and society and give you a little bit of a look into the things that we will be learning in the sport management program here at Pacific. So just real quickly, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and what I love about sport. So that's me and my husband Tyler at a Vikings-Packers game. We live in a house divided, and this is actually how we chose to announce that we were expecting our first son, Lincoln, by just a casual post on social media telling everybody that this was our baby's first game, as I was about 5 months pregnant at this time. And I share this with you because I want to explain to you just how important sport is in my life and just how much I am with so many of you thinking about how important sport is, how much I love sport, how much of a sport fan I am. And so I got into sport management because I wanted to be really close to something that I was really passionate about, but I also liked business. And I would imagine that many of you are here for similar reasons. You really love sport. And I want to give you just a quick overview of the area of sport management. It is the study of both theory, so why things happen the way they do in sport, and applied aspects of basically anything related to organizing, managing, leading sport organizations. And typically we say it has three kind of major arms. We have sport participation, sport entertainment, and sport products. Now, a lot of our time and energy gets spent on the sport entertainment side, on team-related aspects of the sport business. That's partially because there are quite a few jobs in that area and a lot of students have interests in that area. But also it is important, and we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, to note that, there's a huge market for sport participation in working, such as in things like pickleball, which pickleball is going to have a professional league coming soon and is growing rapidly across the country as an activity for people of all ages. And then, of course, the sport product industry, such as Nike, Adidas, working at Dick's Sporting Goods in retail, all of that is also kind of included in this idea of sport. And it really is, people ask me all the time what I teach, and when I tell them sport management, they kind of give me a little bit of a look. And that's because sport management is really, honestly, a really broad field, as we'll talk about here today. So it really includes a combination of skills related to running an organization that exists within sport. And you might be thinking to yourself, like, why would I major in sport management? What would I be getting from a sport management degree? How is this any different? I will happily tell you that the reason that we have a discipline in sport is because sport is a little bit unique as a product, right? So the product itself, most often entertainment, but even in our participation, it's perishable. So as it happens, it's gone. That Vikings-Packers game, my husband and I attended, happened one time, and we can never relive that experience. And while we might have a ticket stub or photos from the game, we don't take that product home and reuse it over and over. It's really exists in our mind and our memories. And that's a little bit unique. Now, that is similar to many services-based industries or products, like, if you go get a massage, or if you attend any kind of concert, right? That's a very similar thing, that idea of perishability and intangibility. But another thing that's unique in sport is the way that sport organizations, especially if we're talking about leagues, college sports, the entertainment product, they rely on each other. They need a certain level of interdependence to exist. So, for example, for the 49ers to be successful, their fans need to feel like they have a chance of winning. They need to feel like the outcome of the game is possibly unknown or different or interesting. And because of that, the leagues within the NFL or the MLB or the National Women's Soccer League, they all need to cooperate enough that teams stay relatively balanced in terms of the competition. And sometimes that means doing things like sharing revenue or limiting player salaries. Because if one team is good all the time, and we've seen that with dynasties in sport like the Yankees or the Lakers, it's great for the fans of that team, but the fans in general get a little bit bored with that. We often see in sport non-traditional career paths. So individuals might move in from coaching roles to administrative roles, playing roles into administrative roles. You might move from the banking industry into sport. You might start in sales and move up to managing events or working in external communications. In Modesto, they just hired the first Latina general manager in baseball. And so she was actually working in marketing prior to becoming named the general manager. So we often see non-traditional career paths like that. Sometimes at the lower levels of sport, things move quite quickly. And then the last thing that makes sport really unique is that the importance it holds in our lives. It is part of society. It is woven into the fabric of who we are. And I gave you that example of myself and my husband at the beginning of the chat today, just to show you, how important sport was so important in our lives, to who we are, to who we believe we are as individuals, that we chose to share that we were going to have our first baby in a way connected to sport because it was so important to us. And that makes the study of sociology also important to sport managers, which is a really cool aspect of sport that I really think is unique from so many other industries. We interact with, the sport industry interacts with politics. It interacts with race and gender. It interacts with schools, right? It's a really important part of a college experience, a sport team. It's often, as I mentioned, part of people's identity. People don't usually get super wrapped up in their favorite toothpaste. Like, I'm not knocking down doors if Colgate isn't available at Target. But better believe when the Vikings were in San Francisco this past season, I was at that game, right? Because it was so important to who I am. Sport and culture influence one another. We often see popular pop culture actresses, actors wearing different sport memorabilia. We see sport, stories told in our movies. We see, the way that athletes act, the things that they implement change society or impact communities. And we also say that sport is a microcosm of society, which means the things that happen in sport kind of mirror things that happen in life. And some of those things are very negative, and some of those things can be very positive. And that's why this idea of understanding sociology is really important in sport management and education. And it's something that kind of runs through our program. So in the program, we talk about things like gender, class, economics, culture, ability, politics, how all of those things interact with the sport product and the sport organization and the sport industry, and how as sport managers, we can never completely take the product itself and separate it from society. And it's great in terms of the fact that, when you have passionate fans of a team, or when, being a runner or a tennis player is a really important part of someone's identity, you have kind of an easy market to. But at the same time, we cannot ignore when we see inequalities or we see, violence with athletes, domestic violence issues, or we see discrimination. We can't say, well, it's just sport and it's just a game, so we don't worry about it, because those two things are so closely related. We often say that sport reflects life, but even the opposite can be true, and that life reflects the relationships and the power dynamics that we see within sport. So one really easy way to see this is the relationship of media and its coverage of women's sports. And for many, many years, women's sports have not received much coverage, and they don't receive as much value or importance in our society. And that's a two-way relationship. The media won't cover women's sports because it doesn't bring in the ad revenue that men's sports does. But women's sports aren't popular because they don't get covered, because people can't access them or watch them or get them streamed into their homes. And so they won't get more popular. So it's kind of a catch-22. And we talk about those things and how we're actually starting to see some shifts in that, especially with the recent USA Soccer's decision to pay the men and women's teams equally, as well as women's sports getting more coverage, streaming being easier, so that the different ways that people can have access to women's sports have increased. We'll start to hopefully see a shift in the value and importance that we place on women's sports in society. So if you're starting to get interested and excited about sport, what will you learn in our program? So if you can't tell, I'm a huge Minnesota Vikings fan. Favorite team. Haven't missed a game in many, many years on television. Obviously not in person since we live in California. Often a big part of the sport product is managing facilities and events. So we do have a class in the sport management track that students take that talks about facility and event planning and management. You talk about the way different venues support the experience of both athletes and coaches and fans. Discuss how different stadiums or organizations are funded. Talk a little bit about like day-to-day operations of how to plan an event and how to run an event. When we talk about sport economics, we talk a little bit about NFL, leagues like the NFL, MLB existing as monopolies and essentially being able to, they have an antitrust exemption, which is a legal exemption to monopolies, at least Major League Baseball does. Officially, the rest of the teams just continue to operate like monopolies, which means that they have a very large market share, and that allows them to do things like have more power when they're doing collective bargaining with players, encourage local governments to build stadiums because there aren't very many NBA teams that can come and play in your stadium or in your arena. It increases the profitability, and it allows them to do things like have salary caps to kind of balance out competition. And monopolies are something that we technically are against the law in America, but we've allowed sport organizations, professional sport leagues, and even the NCAA to operate like monopolies for many, many years because it is seen as a benefit to their business. So we talk a little bit about that in the economics course. We also think about sport from a much broader global perspective and introduce students to different types of sports. In America, we're very often very focused on the NFL and football, which is my favorite sport because it is the most popular in the U.S., not realizing that actually worldwide, sports like cricket, rugby, and of course, real football, not American football, are the most popular. That countries across the world use sport to try to develop and help get women and other underserved populations out of poverty and build confidence. We talk a little bit about how the club sport model is very different from the NCAA college sport model and what that might mean, as well as how different professional sport leagues and college sports are trying to expand internationally. Because data is such an important part of really any business, we talk a little bit about sport analytics, and we actually have a sport analytics track that students can take, and it really dives into, analyzing data, running code, thinking about problem solving and decision making, and why we use data to drive decisions. So think of Moneyball as being kind of the catalyst for this working in sport performance and coaching. And if you watch enough sports, you see all kinds of new statistics. And, this is the percentage of win probability for the game if coach makes X decision versus Y decision. That's all analytics driven. And so it's a really exciting, growing area in the sport industry as sport organizations realize they need that extra edge to compete. It doesn't just happen on the field, it also happens off the field or off the court, off the pitch. The analytics, both in descriptive ways as well as trying to create predictive models and optimize everything from venue management to marketing, which I saved marketing as one of our major courses and topics for last because I'm a marketer at heart. That's where my experience and my research lies and where my true love is. And so in the marketing class, we cover a lot of different things, but we actually approach marketing in sport from both the marketing of sport, so the sport product itself, the team, the baseball bat, the road race or triathlon, and the marketing through sport, which is non-sport companies using sport as a vehicle to market their products, things like sponsorships or just commercials that are run during sporting events. All of those are designed to use the popularity of sport and reach often very difficult demographic, which is middle-aged to older males who tend to be sport fans. So that we cover both of those aspects of marketing and sport. And we also spend a lot of time on social media and digital marketing because, again, sport is such an important part of our lives that it really integrates with social media and general media and our excitement about our favorite teams. So let's just briefly show you a couple issues that talk about in college sport, like compliance, funding of intercollegiate athletic programs as expenses increase. Name, image, and likeness is a topic across multiple courses in our program. Marketing, finance, you'll talk about one of your law classes because it is really changing the face of college athletics. And in professional sport, again, because sport organizations have unions and they're collectively bargained, we talk a little bit about what that means in terms of player salary, and you will get an understanding of, why the league disciplines in certain conditions, because that's all agreed to through the players union. We talk a lot about the role of the media, how we generate revenue from stadiums and arenas, as well as what revenue sharing means for teams and organizations. So just a few final thoughts for you to think about as you get excited about it, interested in, and start thinking about the fall and joining the sport management degree. It's so much bigger than students realize. Students usually come in as undergraduates and they're just like, oh, I'm going to work for the big 4 or 5 professional sport leagues in the US or a D1 college program. But the sport management industry is much bigger than that. It includes Olympic sports and high school sports and YMCAs and parks and recreations and sporting events. It's so much bigger. And so many times students actually get jobs in what we would consider the lower levels of sport and really, really enjoy it and stay there their whole careers. So some of the advantages of becoming a sport manager, these are the easier things that we typically think about. You can affect young people if you're working in high school or college sport. You can potentially gain professional power or prestige. And if you truly love working in sport, you will never work a day in your life. Now, some of the disadvantages is that it often takes a long time to get to those powerful positions, and there's a limited number of them available. Sometimes that means that you give up on hobbies, you miss family holidays, you miss weddings, you work long hours, you have to move around a lot. But if you truly love it, again, you're back to never working a day in your life. And again, I just explained how wide the industry is, so there are opportunities that aren't quite so time-consuming or all-involving. So some of the things we support our students doing, and I want you to start thinking about before you even get on campus, is start talking to people who who work in sport. Just call up somebody at a local sport team and say, hey, I just want to talk to you about what it was like to work in sport. I'm so excited to join the sport management program, get started on my degree, but I want to hear more about the real ins and outs. People who are professionals in sport love to help students. They love to help you explore this thing that they love so much. Get into the habit of, demonstrating excellence in the things that you do, the little things especially, networking consistently, and start thinking through something unique about yourself that you can separate yourself from and build around yourself to make yourself quite different than the others who are going to be searching for jobs. And these are all things, these strategies for advancement that we will encourage and support while you're a student here at University of the Pacific. So my final thought for you as you get ready to join the program, I'm so excited to meet you all. Remember this one thing, that the love of sport is not enough to succeed in the field of sport management. You must have a genuine interest in working in the business of sport. I love sport. I love watching my Vikings play. But when I go to a sporting event, I'm thinking about the behind the scenes, right? Who's dealing with the issues? Who's tweeting about what's happening on the field? What's happening in the marketers, back of their mind as they see sponsorship? That's what I'm thinking about. And that's what you're going to leave our program thinking about and being excited about. You will be interested in so much more than just what's happening on the court or in the arena. Again, I apologize I could not be there today to give this presentation live and see all your wonderful faces, but please reach out to me if you have questions, or really if you just want to chat a little bit more about this field of sport management that I love so much and you want to get to know more about the program that you will be joining. I welcome any and all questions. Check my email over the summer and would be more than happy to connect with you. Thank you so much.